winter day in Washington, a first-term congressman from the backwoods stands up and says no to the most powerful man in America. The chamber tilts just a little because a man who is supposed to be an ornament has decided to be a hinge. 5 years later, the songs say, "He dies at the Alamo," but songs are easy. The truth costs more. This is the story of David Crockett, frontiersman, legislator, reluctant mascot of a country that liked its heroes simple and its problems complicated. We'll test the legend against the record. The vote that exiled him from power, the letter that thanked him, the speech he probably never gave, and the death that refuses to sit still. Along the way, keep one question ready. What do we want our golden age to have looked like, and what did it really take? He was not born on a mountaintop. He was born near the Nolichucky River, where winters were long and money was short. He left home early, traded labor for survival, and learned the mathematics of hunger. What you have, what you owe, what you can risk. He hunted because the cupboard did not care about poetry. He spoke plainly because plain speech is what people understand when the weather turns and the roof leaks. The ballads would later hand him a coonskin cap and a grin as wide as a river. The ledger books gave him debt. What he did have, long before fame found him, was a way of telling a story that put you in the room. He made people feel they were there when the dog barked and the shot cracked and the darkness shifted. That talent carried him from county office to the Tennessee legislature, and then, improbably, to Congress in 1827. He arrived in a capital that ran on favors, on silence, on the gentle art of not seeing. He would never quite master that art. The country was growing. Land hunger sharpened into policy. A new president, Andrew Jackson, hero of New Orleans, believed that removing native nations from their homelands was a hard necessity, even a humane one if you said it quickly. Many agreed. The cotton counties clapped. The newspapers called it destiny. Destiny can be very persuasive when it's profitable. Crockett did not share the persuasion. He knew the people who would be pushed. He had traded with them, fought beside and against them, and he could count. He could count the miles to be walked, the graves to be made, the promises already broken. When the Indian Removal Act came to the floor in 1830, he refused it. It was not a speech that made him famous. It was a vote that made him lonely. Only a few opposed. He was the only representative from Tennessee to vote no. The cost arrived quickly. In the back rooms, he was called disloyal. At home, he was called worse. Powerful men prefer that their friends be reliable and their opponents be quiet. Crockett was neither. He lost his seat, regained it, and then lost it again. The way a man loses footing on a muddy hill, one step forward, two back, the slope itself deciding. Across the frontier, in Cherokee country, a different voice took note. Principal Chief John Ross, writing from a nation already feeling the weight of policy, sent Crockett a letter thanking him for his stand. It was not a letter that would make anyone rich. It was simply a record that gratitude existed, that someone in power had chosen conscience over applause. Place that letter on the table beside the roll call. Let them speak to each other. If you've heard about Crockett as the congressman who scolded the House that charity wasn't constitutional, not yours to give, you've heard a story with a pleasing shape. It lines up well with modern arguments, and that is precisely why we should be careful. The text that circulates under his name appears decades after his death, polished in a magazine piece, and then recycled in a biography. The contemporaneous record does not preserve it. Crockett did object to certain relief bills. He did also give his own money in at least one case, when he thought public funds were inappropriate. But the polished speech, as quoted, is most likely a fable stitched to a real man because the fable is useful. It's tempting to keep it. It fits. It also cheats. Good history doesn't cheat, even when it flatters our side. He understood the danger of being turned into a puppet. In 1834, tired of misquotation and hungry to define himself, he dictated his life story. The book is lean, funny, and often unsparing. He admits mistakes and failures. He makes politics sound like agriculture, thorns, drought, and the occasional harvest. He laughs at himself. That voice matters, because when the almanacs arrived, they would laugh for him. The Crockett almanacs were the 19th century's hype machine. Thin paper, tall tales, a star who could do anything except bleed. They made him superhuman because superhumans sell. He could outshoot a myth and outrun a storm and wring a bear's neck while telling a joke. The distance between what those pamphlets sold and what his autobiography confessed tells you everything about the market for national comfort. We have always bought what makes us feel tidy. In 1835, after another electoral defeat, he faced his district and spoke a line that sounded like a quip and tasted like ashes. "You may all go to hell, and I will go to Texas." It was a performance, yes, but also an autobiography in one sentence. He had chosen the losing side on a righteous question and discovered the penalty. He wanted room enough to breathe. Texas was not a shrine when he arrived. It was a rebellion in flux, a map smudged by promises and gunpowder. He traveled west with a small party, signing on as a volunteer among strangers who had made risk their homeland. San Antonio was a garrison, not a memorial, and the Alamo was a bad position defended by men who understood that sometimes you play the hand you're dealt, not because you will win, but because you would like to recognize yourself tomorrow. Crockett was popular in the bivouac. He told stories, he fiddled, he drilled. He had the talent of keeping a camp from collapsing into silence. He also knew, as the siege tightened, that courage is not a solvent for arithmetic. Reinforcements were late. Ammunition was finite. The walls were compromised. The dawn comes faster when the odds are wrong. How he died is a quarrel that will not end. The traditional version, he fought to the last and fell among friends, has the elegance of a statue. Later accounts, most famously a diary attributed to a Mexican officer named José Enrique de la Peña, suggest that some defenders were captured and executed after the battle, possibly including Crockett. Scholars have circled that diary for decades, testing ink and provenance, arguing line by line. Others point to alternative testimonies, to contradictions, to the political uses of such a claim. The evidence does not snap into a single satisfying click. What can we say without pretending to be certain? That men break differently when the world caves in. That memory is a sculptor with a brief. That the image we choose, last stand or execution, usually reveals what we need from him. The Republic prefers martyrs who decline to surrender. The skeptic prefers complications. The record allows both possibilities. A grown country can live with that. When the smoke lifted, the legend went to work. The ballads rewrote his birthplace for a better rhyme. The penny prince polished the coonskin until it shone. The 20th century rediscovered him with bright colors and a chorus line of children's caps. By then, the vote that defined his courage, the refusal to bless removal, had become a footnote, if it was mentioned at all. This is how a golden age sells itself. Expansion as destiny, destiny as pageant, the bills kept off stage. If you were taught that America's rise was a straight road, the kind you can drive at night without touching the wheel, Crockett will annoy you. He is the speed bump that was once a man, a reminder that growth is not the same as goodness, that popularity does not ratify ethics, that a frontier is not free simply because the map says so. He voted no when yes was safer. He paid for it with his career. He walked into a doomed fort with a borrowed flag of hope and a borrowed rifle and a name he had been trying, with limited success, to keep honest. So why do we still care? Because he represents a kind of citizen that democracies claim to want and often cannot stand. The one who believes that conscience survives the whip count. Because on the question of removal, a policy that would shatter families and graves and faith, he made the unprofitable choice. Because the way he died refuses our desire for a perfect ending, and that refusal is instructive. Life is not a tidy narrative. We know this. We still ask for one. Picture him in the House chamber, watching hands go up for a bill he cannot justify. He is not dumb. He can count both votes and consequences. He is not naive. He understands the arithmetic of retaliation. He says no anyway. Later, in a cold camp under a Texas sky, he tells a story to men who have already spent tomorrow. The fire answers, the walls wait, and picture too, the paper trail he tried to leave behind. A book in his own voice, because he understood that if you do not write yourself down, someone else will redraw you. Read him there, in the sentences where he explains a defeat honestly, or makes fun of his own mistakes, or admits the simple truth that politics, the real kind, away from the slogans, is a daily inventory of trade-offs you will think about in the quiet hours for the rest of your life. The Golden Age is a comforting phrase. It suggests that there was a time when the light was cleaner and the choices were clear and the winners deserved to win. The trouble with Golden Ages is that they tarnish under inspection. They require a certain blindness to shine. Crockett is useful because he refuses to be used cleanly. He will not confirm everything you want to believe about your side. He will not let the other side settle into a sneer. He stands there, stubborn, funny, reckless, and at least once when it mattered, right. If this is not the version that fits on a lunchbox, that's the point. The lunchbox was never the measure. The measure is what he did when saying yes would have been easier. The measure is that letter from a chief whose people would soon be forced along a road lined with new graves. The measure is our willingness to live with an ending we cannot prove to everyone's satisfaction. A last thought, and it belongs to you. We carry the myths we choose. We can carry the cartoon with the perfect hat and the tidy death and the convenient lecture he probably never gave. Or we can carry a flawed human being who told the truth when it cost him, who tried to keep control of his own story, and whose legend keeps slipping out of our fingers every time we squeeze too hard. If you learned something you didn't expect to hear, hold on to it, test it, share it. Good history is not an inheritance, it is maintenance. And heroes, the useful kind, are not saints polished to a shine. They are the people who put something stubborn and decent into the gears and refuse to apologize when it makes a noise. There's one more door we could open, if you like. It swings toward another figure of the same era, a president whose shadow still covers the century, a bank war that rewired finance, and a famous line he probably never said about a Supreme Court he couldn't afford to ignore. But that is for another night. For now, leave Crockett where he belongs, not on a mountaintop, not in a jingle, but somewhere between a know that mattered and a morning when the walls shook and the record went dim. If you value stories that admit uncertainty without surrendering truth, keep this one close. The legend will always try to take it back. He was not born on a mountaintop. He was born near the Nolichucky, where the water ran cold and fast and money rarely lingered. The Crockett family moved when rent and luck demanded it, and the arithmetic of his childhood was simple. Work early, eat when you can, sleep where you must. He learned the frontier curriculum, woodcraft, weather, the language of tracks, because winter does not grade on a curve. He tried a little schooling, briefly, and left it even faster. The teacher's switch landed, and so did his decision. The woods would be his classroom, the road his handwriting. He hired out to drovers, split rails, took any job that kept the ledger from turning red. He watched men talk their way into advantage, and he watched other men, quieter, plainer, earn trust one errand at a time. Later, when the ballots came, he would remember which kind of man people kept in their debt of gratitude. Court days taught him politics. Not the textbook kind, but the real thing. Handshakes that meant something, jokes that reduced a room's temperature, promises you could afford to keep. He married young, buried young, married again. Loss made him careful, not timid. The militia gave him discipline and a small rank. The woods gave him stories and meat. When he first ran for local office, he was more useful than impressive, and he lost. When he ran again, he had a better map, the sort drawn in people, not ink, and he won. He did not hide his rough edges. He made a habit of beating the newspapermen to the punchline by writing it himself. Years later, when he put his life into print, the sentences came plain and stubborn, a man talking across a table rather than at a podium. He did not pretend to be a philosopher. He did not apologize for being practical. He admitted mistakes without the lawyerly fragrance of a non-apology. Here's what I did. Here's why it failed. Here's what I learned. That voice, unperfumed and direct, is the most reliable compass we have for the terrain he actually walked. But even as he tried to own his story, another version of him was already for sale. Newspapers shaved off the splinters. Printers in distant cities discovered a business model in exaggeration and ink. The name David became Davy because a vowel and a smile travel farther than a full signature. The frontier, which he knew as rain and blisters, became a stage on cheap paper where a man could grin a raccoon out of a tree, tame a storm with a wink, and shoulder a bear like a sack of meal. Those little almanacs moved like gossip, light, fast, and profitable. The trick of the almanacs wasn't that they lied. It was that they lied so cheerfully, you wanted to forgive them. They took ordinary bravery and turned it theatrical. They scraped away debt and grief and left only a kind of comic invincibility. It was a bargain audience and editor both understood. We'll give you a hero who never misses. You give us your coins and your disbelief, suspended neatly till next year's issue. Meanwhile, the living man, mud on his boots, unpaid notes on his table, kept campaigning, judging that it was better to be underestimated by strangers than misjudged by neighbors. He walked a line between usefulness and spectacle. On one side stood the voters who needed a road mended, a quarrel settled, a petition carried to the Capitol by someone who would not be bought for a warm dinner. On the other side stood the myth, which required deeds tidier than life allows. He knew the difference and joked about it, but he also resented the way the myth kept reaching into his pocket and voting on his behalf. The country was hungry for symbols. It preferred its frontiersmen lacquered, and its politics disguised as personality. Crockett, against his own best efforts, fit too well. He could speak in a way that reached the back row and left the back row feeling seen. He could make an adversary laugh in the middle of a scolding. He could turn a policy argument into a story that stuck. Those same gifts let the presses turn him into a mascot, something to wave rather than to read. Remember, though, the patient ledger underneath. The man who would later resist a popular wrong did not sprout fully formed from a ballad. He was carved by scarcity, corrected by defeat, and trained by 1,000 small transactions of trust. His conscience was not a costume. It was a callus. You will hear before long about a famous oration put in his mouth, a neat little lecture that flatters modern appetites. It travels well, like the almanac jokes. It sounds exactly like what people want Crockett to have said. That should make us careful. In a few minutes, we'll test that speech the same way we test any good story. Against paper, against dates, against the stubborn voice of the man who signed his name, David, and tried, as best he could, to keep himself from being edited into fiction. Court days and muster days were his classroom. He learned how a crowd breathes, how laughter drops a fence, how a story can move a room an inch at a time toward the truth you need them to see. He was not polished. He didn't need to be. He had the gift of frontier values more than elegance. He sounded like he lived where you lived. Local office came first, the kind of seat that lets a man fix a road, settle a quarrel, and wear out a pair of boots for the common good. The militia gave him a title and a habit of order. The stump gave him a stage and a lesson. If you keep your language plain and your promises few, people will lend you their patience. By 1827, he was bound for Washington. That year did not make him a different person. It only moved the furniture. He brought the same jokes, the same bluntness, the same sense that a man's word is a bridge he must drive across every day. He arrived to find a nation straining at its seams, land prices rising with the creek water, cotton money dictating the tempo, and a new kind of confidence that called itself destiny. On the horizon stood Andrew Jackson, hero, hammer, and soon enough president, whose solution to the Indian problem wore the soft face of inevitability, removal as a kind of mercy, if you said it quickly. Crockett did not say it quickly. He knew the frontier as a place of bargains made and broken, of neighbors who did not look like you, but traded with you and fought beside you and buried their dead within sight of your fences. He could count, and the sums were simple. Treaties promised, pressure applied, signatures gathered, land taken, people pushed. When the Indian Removal Bill moved through the House in 1830, he watched the floor the way a hunter watches the tree line, patiently, alert for what shifts when no one wants to admit it has. We do not have clean, stenographic speeches for that day. This was an era when the official record was more diary than dictation, when newspapers paraphrased and political allies remembered a little too well. What we do have is solid enough to stand on. The journals that list who stood where it mattered. Crockett's name is among the nays. That no was not a flourish. It did not arrive dressed as grandeur. It was a small black mark in a column that would tilt the country for generations. Look at it closely, and you can almost see his calculation. The votes he would lose at home, the friendships he would frost in Washington, the quiet ways the machine would teach him humility. He was the only representative from Tennessee to reject the bill. That is not a boast. It is an isolation. In the chamber, the arguments for removal sounded tidy. They spoke of civilization and compactness, of borders that made more sense, and of benevolence born on wagons. Tidy arguments always arrive well-groomed. Crockett listened and did not mistake grooming for goodness. He did not pretend not to know what it means to put a family on a road because a piece of paper changed hands 1,000 miles away. He did not pretend that a treaty signed under pressure is a promise kept in good faith. His vote was a refusal to pretend. News traveled outward the way it always does, first as numbers, then as stories. Back home, some called him a grandstander, others worse. Friends who loved Jackson learned to speak around him. The party men made a note. The next election would be close, and the ledger, public and private, would tighten. But there were other readers, far from Tennessee, who saw the same black mark in the roll and understood it as a kind of shelter, fragile but real. We will come to one of them soon, a chief writing from the other side of a policy. His letter still smells of smoke and winter. For the moment, stay in the house with him. Imagine what it costs to say no when yes would be forgiven and rewarded. Imagine the silence after the vote, the paperwork shuffling, the coughs, the mundane machinery resuming as if no one's future had just been priced and sold. Politics can make a man feel very small on the day he does the largest thing he will ever do. Crockett did not turn that day into a sermon. He did not seek the varnish of a perfect speech to float on later. He took the more dangerous path by leaving the record spare and letting the consequence do the talking. He would discover soon enough how consequence speaks in a district where loyalty to Jackson ran like a river and where the word principle was admired in songs and punished at the polls. What got him to Congress, usefulness, humor, the talent for translating policy into chores, was still there. He shook every hand that would be shaken and wore out his sleeves, doing the dull work that stands between a promise and a plank in a bridge. But the vote marked him. It made him a man apart, and a man apart is hard to sell in a market that prefers teams to consciences. If all you knew was the ballad version, the coonskin crown and the easy grin, this may already feel unfamiliar. Good. The ballad is a postcard. The ledger is a book. And in that book, this is the chapter where a politician learns that a straight spine can be expensive. Keep reading. The thanks he earned for that no will arrive from a place most of his colleagues preferred not to see, written in a careful hand, warm with dignity and grief. Defying Andrew Jackson was not a pastime. It was a risk you could measure in lost friends and future votes. When the removal bill came to its final trial in the House in late May 1830, it scraped through by only a handful. Inevitable is what men call a victory after the math breaks their way. In the moment, it felt precarious. Counted whispers, tightened jaws, a hush when the clerk read the tally. The ink dried into law. The consequences would follow. Legal and human first, moral last, because morality is what history returns to when the lawyers have finished talking. From the Cherokee side, the news did not arrive as debate but as weather. Families would move, or be moved. Treaties, old and new, became slips of paper that could not keep out the rain. In that winter after the vote, a letter traveled east to Washington and found the man who had refused the easy yes. Dated 13th January 1831 and written in the careful formal hand of Principal Chief John Ross, it thanked Davy Crockett directly for his stand. Gratitude is not policy, but it is a record of what decency looks like to the people who needed it. That letter still exists, and it says, in the restrained way of the period, what memory tends to blur, someone in the chamber went against the current, and the people downstream noticed. Washington noticed, too, only it kept its thanks in reserve. Parties are generous to courage when courage is convenient. When it is not, they are excellent bookkeepers. The next election taught him that lesson again. He lost. Later, after wearing out more boot leather than rhetoric, he won. Later still, he lost again. Nothing mysterious there, just the machinery returning the favor for a vote that had embarrassed its engineers. A man can be popular for a story about himself, and very unpopular for the story he insists the country admit. He took the punishment like a man who had expected it. No self-pity, just the kind of joke that lets you walk out of a room with your spine intact. You may all go to hell, and I will go to Texas, he said after the last defeat, and the line stuck because it sounded like liberty with dust on its boots. It wasn't a quip for the ages when it left his mouth. It was a travel plan spoken in a temperate drawl by a man who understood he had fallen out of step with the music and was done pretending otherwise. The supporters of removal called it humane, even protective, an organized mercy that would save Native people from annihilation. They could quote scripture and statistics with equal fluency, but the arithmetic on the ground remained stubborn. Mercy that begins with a surveyor and ends with a soldier does not travel under its own power. It is pushed. Crockett recognized the push for what it was. He had traded with the people it would move. He had seen the bargaining tables, heard the translated promises, watched the land itself turned into a commodity whose value multiplied every time the treaty language became more efficient. The vote was his refusal to bless the euphemism. And yet he did not turn his refusal into a sermon. He left the record spare, journals, a tally, and the occasional sketched summary of remarks. This was an era before microphones and verbatim shorthand on every desk. We do not possess a pristine word-for-word transcript of a thunderclap speech. We possess something harder to decorate, a clear position and a roll call that puts his name in the unfashionable column. If you're looking for fireworks, you'll be disappointed. If you're looking for a spine, it's right there in black ink. The distance between the chamber and the frontier is measured in rivers and rumors. Back home, the Jackson men shook their heads with the indulgent scorn reserved for apostates. In Cherokee country, a chief took the time to write a letter of thanks. Somewhere in between, ordinary people recalculated their opinions the way they always do, quietly, in kitchens and on porches, deciding whether they preferred a representative who could be counted on by the party or one who could be counted on by his own conscience. The next few years supplied the answer, for a while, and then took it back. When he finally turned his face west, it was not the cosplay of a legend returning to his natural habitat. It was a citizen's emigration, away from a politics that had mistaken loyalty for virtue, and toward a place where a man might exchange one kind of risk for another. Before we go with him, before the road unwinds toward San Antonio and the map begins to smudge, there is one more story that needs a hard light. You've seen it shared. The perfect oration that says exactly what some of us wish the Constitution had said about charity and power. It is tidy, portable, and almost certainly not his. If we are going to keep faith with the man who signed his name David, not the mascot who wore Davy, we owe him the courtesy of taking that speech out of his mouth and putting the facts back in. The truth is slower than a ballad. It also lasts longer. You've seen it shared. Trim as a proverb, sharp as a reprimand. David Crockett rises in the House and says that public charity isn't constitutional. Not yours to give. The line travels so well, you can almost hear the gavel pause. It flatters our sense of clarity. It makes a very messy century feel suddenly clean. Now the slow work. The first time that speech shows up whole, it isn't in the congressional record, and it isn't in a newspaper sketch filed from the gallery. It's in a magazine story printed decades after Crockett was dead. The byline is a disguise, James J. Bethune, and the hand behind the disguise belongs to a writer of boys' adventure tales, Edward S. Ellis. The year is 1867. The war is over. A wounded country is deciding what the Constitution has always meant, and parables are in season. In Ellis's tale, Crockett is not a fallible politician who sometimes voted wrong and sometimes right. He is a mouthpiece carved from granite, delivering a speech that solves an argument that refuses, in real life, to be solved at all. 17 years later, the story comes back again, recut and polished, in an 1884 biography under Ellis's own name. It is the same tidy episode with the same neat moral. Compassion should live in private pockets, not in public budgets. But when you go looking for the scaffolding, committee reports, stenographic notes, the kind of scraps that cling to real events, you find air. Congress in the 1830s did not record every word, and absence alone does not prove fiction. Still, when a full-dress speech appears first as post-war literature under a pseudonym, then as part of a writer's profitable legend-making, caution is not cynicism, it's hygiene. Here is a better way to talk about Crockett and money. He was a strict constructionist on some questions of federal spending. He said, out loud and on paper, that institutions serving the sons of the rich did not deserve a blank check from the poor. He even introduced a resolution to abolish the military academy at West Point on those grounds, a position as unpopular among gentlemen as rain at a parade. That is in the journals. You can point to it, hold it in your hand, and see where the ink sits. It tells you something real about his instincts without borrowing lines he never spoke. As for the famous tale's most touching moment, the candidate reaching into his own pocket when he refuses to reach into the treasury, that generosity comes to us inside the same story-shaped package that fails the provenance test. Perhaps he did it once, perhaps many did, but perhaps is not an affidavit, and we don't smuggle unproven kindness into the record just because we wish it were there. Crockett deserves the fairness he tried to practice. Measure him by what we can verify. Why does the myth stick? Because it is efficient. It reduces a hard question, the scope of federal power, to the length of a meme, and it anoints a beloved figure as its patron saint. It permits us to stop thinking precisely where thinking gets difficult, where disaster relief is not ideology, but logistics, where a widow is a person, not a case, where a republic is asked to be both frugal and humane and is punished by arithmetic either way. The parable lets us skip ahead to a victory that leaves no blood on the floor. But history is not a motivational poster. It is a ledger and a map and a very poor therapist. If we take the speech out of Crockett's mouth, what remains is more interesting. A working politician with a spine, a set of fiscal scruples, and a sense that public money should not be an elevator for private privilege. He wasn't a plaster saint. He was a man who could be wrong, change his mind, and still refuse the easy vote when the stakes were human. Keep that version. It is less convenient and more useful. It teaches you to distrust quotations that arrive pre-polished and perfectly aligned with your current opinions. It trains your ear to hear the difference between a voice and a ventriloquist. It honors the dead by refusing to make them props. We will meet the myth again, in other clothes, on other battlefields. It will offer to simplify the world for us. We'll say no and keep watching. By 1834, he had grown tired of being ventriloquized. Reporters polished his words until they shone like someone else's. Editors trimmed him into a mascot. So he did the counterintuitive thing for a man accused of being only a tale. He wrote his own tale. A narrative of the life of David Crockett is not grand. It is quick-footed and sly, full of mule kicks and side glances. A voice that sounds like a man leaning across a rough table to tell you where he went wrong and why he tried again. He admits to blunders with a grin that saves him from sermonizing. He needles his enemies without turning himself into a martyr. He talks money, debt, weather, and luck. Topics that don't make it into ballads because they make heroes human. The book did what he needed. It put his voice on paper before someone else stamped theirs over it. It also turned him into a ticketed attraction. He rode that voice east, reading to rooms that wanted to see the frontier without getting mud on their shoes. Boston, New York, Philadelphia, crowds came to witness the contradiction. A so-called backwoodsman who could hold a city audience by the collar with plain talk, a joke, and the soft thud of an inconvenient fact. He became the rare politician who could tour like a novelist and campaign like a neighbor, reminding listeners that politics, before microphones, was intimacy performed at scale. But the presses did not stop at his signature. Print culture smelled profit and began to run faster than he could. The Crockett almanacs arrived, cheap, hasty, spectacular, annual pocket theaters where he never missed a shot, where bears died laughing, where the woods bent to his will with a wink. These were not biographies, they were appetite machines. They exaggerated a living man into a folk engine who could generate sales on demand. He could have complained, and did, privately, but the market rarely listens to its merchandise. The almanacs built a brand that was close enough to him to be valuable and far enough from him to be painless for everyone except the subject. The country wanted that version. It fit. It gave the expanding republic a cartoon conscience it could carry in its pocket. Frontier courage with the bruises removed. A nation that preferred its doubts off stage could buy a paper hero at the counter with its tobacco and pretend that the price of progress was counted only in tall tales and coonskins. Meanwhile, the man who actually paid the price, for a vote for a principle, for the stubbornness to say no when yes was easier, kept trying to put the real story back on the rails. The almanacs taught another lesson, brutal and simple. Once your name becomes property, other people will develop it. Printers expanded the Crockett line the way a merchant expands a successful shelf. New covers, new feats, new anecdotes produced by men who had never seen the Nolichucky, much less slept cold by it. Editors discovered that the frontier sells best when it's tidy, and they tidied him relentlessly. The laugh lines deepened, the debts vanished, the compromises dissolved into a joke. If you stood far enough away, you could believe the joke was the truth. Time added another lacquer. In the 1950s, the studio lights arrived. A made-for-children refrain rose and rose until it blotted out the book he had written and much of the man who wrote it. Coonskin caps became a currency of belonging. The ballad climbed the charts and sanded down every complicated edge. For a season, a generation marched under a tune that turned a grieving, argumentative republic into a chorus line. The merchandise legend was not born in that decade, but it was finished there, sealed in plastic and exported by the crate. None of this means the legend is worthless. Legends are repositories for wishes. They tell you what a people wanted to believe about itself at a given moment. Rugged innocence in the 1830s, cheerful invincibility in the 1950s. But they can also be chloroform. They put the mess to sleep. They turn a man who bled into a symbol that cannot. Our job here is not to sneer at the myth. It is to scrape until the person underneath can breathe again. So return to the book. Hear the unvarnished diction, short sentences that carry their own weight, jokes that pivot into confession, a stubborn refusal to dress up a loss as anything but a lesson. That is the sound of someone attempting to repossess himself. He knew what it meant to have your name become public property. He tried with ink to foreclose the sale. There is a pattern worth noticing. When the Republic needs comfort, it chooses the loudest version of a man. When it needs instruction, it quietly reopens the pages he wrote. Tonight we are choosing the pages. They will not flatter every certainty. They will not give the easy answer to the hardest questions. They will, however, keep faith with the one thing a legend cannot do: change your mind. Keep that faith handy as we head west. The story you learned as a child ends with a clean tableau. Last shots, last shouts, the curtain fall into applause. The file we are about to open is not that tidy. Among the affidavits and diaries is a claim many still refuse to consider, that in the final minutes at San Antonio, David Crockett may have surrendered. The word itself feels like a betrayal in a narrative that prefers perfection. That's why we need it. Bring your skepticism. Bring your decency. Keep an open mind. He left after the last defeat with a small party and a larger silence, pointing his horse toward a line on the map that promised more room than respect. The talk back home had hardened into a verdict. In Texas, at least, a man might trade humiliation for hazard and call it even. He wanted land, yes, an honest stake earned by service, but more than that, he wanted to step out from under the thumb of other men's certainty. Less martyrdom, more opportunity. The road west in winter is a teacher. Across the bottoms in the piney woods, through Little Rock where the streets turn to soup after rain, down the long corridors of creek and cane, he learned again the arithmetic of distance, miles, rations, moods. A handful of Tennesseans rode with him, men who knew his stories and had their own, bound together by a hunch that luck favors motion. At way stations, the talk was all Texas, rumor, prophecy, and inventories. Who had guns, who had powder, who had a chance. Nacogdoches was their doorway. The town felt like a porch between worlds. Spanish timbers silvering in the sun, traders passing with news that sounded like weather reports from another planet. There, with the ink-stiff formality of men who intend to mean it, he swore the oath to the provisional government. 6 months' service if needed. Land in return if they prevailed. He was not shy about that bargain. The frontier seldom is. A man could be both principled and practical, and he had family enough to justify both. What was Texas at that moment? Not a myth, not yet. A quarrel that had outgrown its room. The 1824 Constitution, which once balanced Mexico's federal experiment, had been strangled by central power. Settlers from the United States and Tejano allies who preferred local say to distant decree called themselves defenders of an older promise. Slavery lurked in the background, like a debt nobody could pay and few would admit. The cotton counties wanted what cotton counties always want: labor on terms that suited them. And that desire tied the cause to compromises that would not be redeemed for a very long time. Between the proclamations and the powder kegs stood the ordinary business of a revolt: scattered committees, overlapping commands, thin supply lines, the hope that a single victory could act like gravity and pull the rest into place. San Antonio, Bexar, was a prize already taken once and easy to lose again. The Alamo was a mission converted into a fort because there was no better option at hand. Thick walls, bad perimeter, too large to hold with too few men, and too important to abandon without confessing the weakness everyone felt. When he arrived, a latecomer to a bad hand, authority was a seesaw. James Bowie held sway among the volunteers. William Barrett Travis, young and tight as a bowstring, commanded the regulars. The arrangement was a truce with a clock in it. Crockett fit where he always had, the seam between fear and laughter. He drilled when told and drilled others when asked. He stood watch. He cut wood. He played his fiddle in the long dark hours. Some say often, some say once. And memory is a poor bookkeeper in a siege. What matters is that the men, for a little while, remembered something other than arithmetic. He could do that for a room, move it an inch from despair and hold it there until morning. He told stories too, the old Nola Chucky jokes set like rivets into the present tense of hunger and cold. In the ledger of camp tasks, the keeping of spirits is seldom written down, but soldiers know who does it. He wrote home, according to later accounts, brief notes with a practiced mix of cheer and omission, the kind of letters that keep mothers from waking at every wind shift. Whether every line survives the audit of historians is less important than the fact that he meant to be read by people who would worry, that he folded optimism into paper and hoped it would travel faster than news. That, too, is a kind of service. Outside the walls, the horizon darkened with certainty. Santa Anna was coming, and not alone. The cordon drew tight in late February, like a hand around a throat. Drums at night, bugles in the cold. Red flags, no quarter, lifted where men could see them, because terror is a form of communication. Inside, Travis wrote for help with a pen that sounded like a drum. Fannin at Goliad weighed odds and wagons and found them wanting. Promises marched on paper, on the ground they limped, and still the routines persisted. Check the flints, oil the locks, count the cartridges again, sharpen a joke to shave a bad hour, patch what passes for a parapet. A fortress this size needs bodies. They had names instead. The calculus never improved. Every day added courage and subtracted advantage. You can hold off arithmetic with grit, with prayer, with a tune scratched out on a tired fiddle string, but only until dawn comes wearing another army. It came before daylight on a hard March morning, the kind of gray that swallows distance and mercy. Columns advanced, ladders bumped the stone, the first volleys cracked and folded the dark in sheets. A place like the Alamo turns into hallways very quickly. Angles, corners, rooms that become traps without warning. Men fought where they stood and then where they fell back. Each retreat a confession and a promise to try again 10 paces later. The flag of no quarter kept its word. In those minutes, the legend later pretended everything was simple. It was not. Courage is simple, situations aren't. Some defenders died cleanly, as stories wish. Others died in the tangle. What matters to us here, in the part that can still be learned from, is the choice to be present in a bad equation and do the work you said you would do. He did that. He made a doomed position feel, for a time, like a duty rather than a sentence. He carried his share of the weight, which is what men mean when they call another man steady. The shape of his end we will weigh in a moment with the documents that won't agree. For now, fix him in your mind where the noise is thickest. A volunteer among volunteers, a storyteller among men who needed one, a citizen who made a gamble with open eyes. He had asked Texas for land and a chance to reset his name. Texas asked him in exchange for everything else. The battle's end arrives the way dawn does in a bad dream. Sudden, colorless, and much too loud. Ladders slam, the first ranks break and flood. Rooms that were bedrooms become killing grounds. Corridors turn into wind tunnels for musket smoke. If you stand in that noise for even a paragraph, you understand why tidy endings are an act of mercy we perform on ourselves afterward. Two stories grow out of the wreckage. The first is the one most of us were taught, that Davy Crockett died fighting, weapon in his hands, among men who did the same. It has the virtue of simplicity and the dignity of refusing to invent witnesses. All defenders were reported dead. The non-combatants, women, children, a few enslaved people, survived to tell very little, because what they saw was brief and terrible and scattered. This version rests on the obvious. A no-quarter flag had flown. The assault was ferocious. The last minutes were chaos. There was no stage left on which to act out surrender and reprieve. A clean fall in a dirty place. If that is what you need from a hero, the ground will hold it for you. The second story begins later, on paper. In it, some defenders are captured alive after the fight, separated out, and executed by order. Among them, possibly, is Crockett. The most famous source for that claim is a diary ascribed to a Mexican officer, José Enrique de la Peña. It surfaced long after the smoke cleared, was copied and recopied, assessed and reassessed. Specialists have authenticated, then doubted, then authenticated parts again. The way you do when a document's life outside a locked archive has been too interesting. It names no perfect witnesses. It makes no court-proof promise. It simply asserts that not every man at the Alamo died at the wall where he stood. Why do good historians disagree? Because each piece of evidence carries its own weather. Provenance is a storm that can blow a manuscript off the table. A diary written soon after the event feels solid. One published from a later copy invites questions. Internal consistency is another wind. A narrative that aligns with known troop movements and orders gets warmer. A narrative that contradicts other reliable reports goes cold. Corroboration can be a cruel friend. Sometimes the only matching testimony comes from a source with its own incentives or its own fractures. And over everything hangs the fog of memory. Even when honest, eyewitnesses missee in the press of a few minutes that cancel a lifetime. Listen closely to what the competing versions actually cost you. The died fighting account does not require you to imagine an army stopping in its tracks to process prisoners in the middle of a storm. It lets courage be kinetic. The defender's last act is the act of resistance, not the endurance of an order. It also spares you the uglier arithmetic of executing captives after victory. The execution account, if true, draws a harder line under the no-quarter flag and the ferocity already admitted by all sides. It asks you to accept that some stories end not with valor on the wall, but with a command in a courtyard. There are shards that point in both directions. A few Mexican officers wrote years later of prisoners taken and shot. Other participants denied or ignored such details, as soldiers often do about deeds that look different in daylight. Some Texian accounts passed along a rumor of a handful spared for a breath, only to be put against the stone. Others insisted no such pause existed. The non-combatants, whose testimony is the least theatrical, do not agree with each other in ways that would make a prosecutor's life easier. None of this is treachery. It is what happens when a morning arrives that was never meant to be narrated. So, how did he die? The only honest answer is the one that resists both sentiment and certainty. He died inside an event designed to erase witnesses. He died in a place where paperwork was powder and the court reporter was smoke. Whether he fell at the wall or stood in a knot of captives staring at an officer who had orders to keep a promise made by a red flag, his courage is not diminished, and neither is our obligation to say we do not know when we do not. It is tempting to be angry at uncertainty, to treat it as an insult to the dead, but the dead do not need our certainties. We do. We choose them because they complete us. If you want America to be a mural of last stands, you will keep the version where a hero falls in the press and nothing afterward can touch him. If you want America to be a ledger that accounts for what victory sometimes does to the vanquished, you will test, cautiously, the account that says a group of men were shot after the fight. In both cases, you are revealing your idea of the country, not proven a fact about that courtyard. There is one thing we can say that honors the truth without pretending to own it. Crockett's presence at the Alamo was not a costume change. It was the continuation of a habit, to do the work in front of him, even when the math was bad, and the audience smaller than a man's need for reassurance. He steadied others. He carried weight. He made a doomed position livable for a little while with skill, humor, and discipline. At the end, whichever end you choose, he was still doing that. If history sometimes feels unsatisfying here, that is because history is doing its job. It refuses us the cleanest moral. It leaves the human being intact where the legend wants a statue. It asks us to tolerate a sentence that ends with a comma and a cloud of smoke. The price of that honesty is discomfort. The reward is that we do not have to lie to keep a hero. Hold the two stories lightly then, and do not let either become a weapon. The defenders died. The Republic, with all its contradictions, learned a lesson about time and reinforcements and what a red flag means when it is raised where everyone can see it. Santa Anna collected his victory and paid for it later. Texas carried the defeat like a spark to another field. And the name you came here for became a test of how much ambiguity a nation can bear while still telling itself the truth. If you can live with that, uncertain, sourced, and unsatisfying, you are ready to keep going. The aftermath is where legends are minted and mistakes are buried. Our work is to dig in daylight, without malice, without mercy for pretty answers that cannot prove themselves. Dead, he becomes larger than the republic that made him. That is what legends do. They expand to fill the empty space where detail used to live. The first thing to go is the address. Born on a mountaintop in Tennessee, the song announces, and the tune is so bright you almost don't notice that the hill has climbed under his cradle while your back was turned. It's a good lyric, clean, memorable, topographically convenient. The real birthplace, down by the Nolichucky, is less musical and more human. Legends swap the human for the hummable and call it an upgrade. Next, the inventory fills with souvenirs. A coonskin cap becomes a crown. A hunting trick turns into a child's miracle. Kilt-em-a-bar when he was only 3. Because innocence with a rifle is the kind of joke a nation tells itself when it wants virtue without ambiguity. By the time the 20th century gets hold of him, the picture is complete. Technicolor frontier, clean line courage, a chorus you can whistle on your way to the hardware store. Disney sells the hat to every kitchen in America. The ballad climbs and climbs, sanding the edges down until even doubt looks friendly. Walk a flea market decades later, and they're all still there. The smiling almanacs, the glossy lunchboxes, the replicas of a cap that could not possibly have known so many perfect breezes. People trade them across tables as if the past were a garage you can stock in matching sets. The objects are honest, in their way. They don't claim to be archives. They are memories merchandise, proof that a story once touched a million lives and left a pleasant residue. What drifts out of the frame is the vote that cost him. You can page through the souvenirs all morning and find hardly a scrap that reminds you he said no to Andrew Jackson when the country wanted yes. The ballad does not hum about a roll call. It does not trouble the chorus with the words removal or treaty or no quarter on the road. The legend makes room for bears and buckskins because they are simple to love. It does not linger on the image of families pressed forward by policy, because that image asks questions a catchy tune cannot hold. This is the price of a golden age. The phrase itself is advertising, a gleam cast backward to make the present feel inherited, inevitable, tidy. Expansion gets renamed destiny. Land hunger learns to smile for paintings. The costs are paid by people who get pushed off maps and then out of commemorations. To keep the shine, you move the trouble off stage and replace it with a hat. Crockett would have understood the trick. He spent years watching printers build him into a mascot while he tried stubbornly to keep his own voice in circulation. He knew that a country prefers its doubts resolved and its heroes uncomplicated. But he also knew, because he counted votes and miles and graves, that a good story has to meet the ledger sooner or later. When removal asked for his signature, he refused. That refusal is the truth the legend keeps trying to forget. Think about what the forgetting buys. If the last image you keep is of a smiling frontiersman under a broad sky, then the Republic's rise becomes frictionless, a moral escalator that simply went up because up was ordained. But if you keep, alongside the hat, the black mark in the roll next to his name, the story changes temperature. Expansion becomes choice layered over choice, some brave, some foolish, some cold. And the people who paid for those choices step back into view. You can still admire the courage at a breached wall. You simply cannot pretend it was the only courage that mattered. The mid-century song and show did not invent this kind of amnesia. They perfected it. They were answering a different need. Post-war America wanted a frontier it could hand to children without explaining the bill. So the script tightened, the colors brightened, and the man who had once aggravated his own party with an inconvenient conscience was promoted to national mascot. It worked. A generation marched under the catchy refrain, and an older, thornier truth fell silent under the music. If you want to hear it again, turn down the volume and read. Read the 1834 book where he makes fun of himself and his enemies in the same paragraph and tells the truth about money, because money doesn't care what story you prefer. Read the journals that make no poetry out of a roll call. Read the letter from a Cherokee chief who thanked him in winter language for doing the unfashionable thing. These are not souvenirs. They are receipts. None of this requires you to throw the hat in the river. The artifacts are part of him now. The way every generation leaves a fingerprint on the past and then calls it restoration. Keep the cap if it makes you smile. Sing the chorus if it reminds you of a time when the house seemed full of promise. But keep beside them the fact that the same man who became a jingle first became lonely for telling the truth out loud. A nation that calls one century its golden age should do the courtesy of counting the gold honestly. Some of it glittered in invention, audacity, and civic energy. Some of it was panned from other people's rivers. Crockett stood at that seam and once chose the harder vein. He was not a saint. He was not a prophet. He was a working politician with a backbone at the worst possible moment for one, and he paid the price that well-run machines always exact from their dissenters. The legend will go on trying to protect you from this, because legends are kind that way. They want you to feel brave without having to be complicated. But the better inheritance is harder. To hold the song in one hand and the vote in the other, and admit that the second explains the first more than the first explains anything. He saw enough to say no. He paid for it. A country that wants to be decent should keep that sentence where it can see it. When you teach his name, teach both stories. Let the melody play. It belongs to people who were happy once. Then tell them about a winter letter and a roll call and a day in Washington when a man from the Nolichucky looked at a popular wrong and declined to endorse it. The hat will still fit. The chorus will still rise, but the figure wearing it will be human again, and the golden age will lose a little of its paint and gain a little of its truth. Strip off the costume, and what remains is a citizen who refused a popular wrong, a writer who fought the cartoon drawn around his name, and a death that will not sit still long enough to be lacquered. That is not less heroic. It is more human. The country that lifted him up preferred the version that could be sung and sold. The man we have traced across ledgers and letters is harder to merchandise and easier to trust, America's so-called golden age was hammered from contradictory metals, courage and compromise, invention and injustice. Expansion built railroads and cemeteries. It turned wilderness into farms and treaties into kindling. Crockett stood at that seam and, once, where everyone could see it, said no. He paid for it because machines punish grit in the gears. The lesson is not that he was flawless, or fated, or even right about everything else. The lesson is that a republic is healthiest when ordinary officials will hazard their careers for a principle that does not poll well this week. He also leaves us a warning about stories that arrive too perfect. The frontier almanacs, the post-war parable, the sing-along decade, each took a man and flattened him into comfort. That is how myths work when they serve power. They sand off the splinters that remind you where the wood came from. If you want better history, you have to keep the splinters. They are the proof of work. They keep you from mistaking a sales pitch for a memory. What do we do with him now? Read him, not around him. Begin with the voice he chose for himself. Test it against the records that do not care whether you admire him, and leave room at the end for uncertainty that honors the dead more than certainty ever will. Then bring that habit forward. When a tidy quotation confirms exactly what you already think, pause. Ask where it was born, who carried it, and what it erases. Refusing counterfeit clarity is a civic duty, not a hobby. Hold two truths at once: the song and the roll call, the hat and the winter letter, the courage we prefer to remember, and the courage we struggle to face. If you can do that, you inherit the best part of the man from the Nolichucky, the part that did the plain work in front of him and told the truth when it was expensive. Next time, we turn to the figure who cast the longest shadow over this story, Andrew Jackson. We'll walk into the bank war and hold up another famous line. John Marshall has made his decision. Now, let him enforce it. And we'll test whether it ever passed a living man's lips. Myths aren't just wrong, they're useful to someone. If you want long-form history with receipts, not slogans, subscribe. And if you think we've missed or misread something, bring your sources and make your case in the comments. That's how the record gets sharper, not by chanting the legend, but by checking it.